Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, kicking off a week of more crisis with coronavirus and some thoughts as to where we are right now. Let me maybe start with just this reaction to a sense I've heard. I mean, because the orientation that we get in the U.S. media is very American-centric in the best of times, and also has been overwhelmingly focused on Trump, I get a lot of folks that are saying that the United States has the worst response of any country in the world when it comes to coronavirus. And first of all, obviously that's not true, because the Iranians have been an absolute disaster on every front. And they say, well, okay, well, I don't mean Iran, I mean real countries. But even there, it is in part because the focus is only on the U.S. and not really on what's happening other places. And in part, it's because the focus is overwhelmingly on President Trump, who, to be fair, wants the story to be about him, but it shouldn't be. And the crisis is much broader than that. And if we really look at how the United States is doing so far, the answer is we're not the best. And we like to think we're the best, especially our healthcare system. And so it's hard to say that the U.S. is leading by example, but we're far from the worst. In fact, overall, I would say we're about average. And let me unpack that for you a little bit. So if you want to understand how countries around the world are responding to coronavirus, there are a few different things you should look at. First, you want to look at the holistic response from the institutions that matter. That means the whole government, the federal government, the state government, the local government. It also means, is the government working effectively with the private sector, right? So that when you want to talk about response, that's the breadth of response. And then you need to look at what kinds of response. You've got healthcare response, you've got fiscal response, you've got monetary response. All of those really matter in terms of getting the country on its feet. Yes, you have to ensure that the virus is contained and the people are treated. You also have to make sure that the economy continues to function. And both of those things need to be paid attention to. Finally, you have issues of whether or not the people are actually listening to the government. So you can have a strong government response, the people aren't paying attention, and the thing gets worse, right? So you need to have some level of alignment and compliance. In that regard, if we look at the United States, you would say that the response on the healthcare side has been late and comparatively ineffective. The United States already had underinvested in healthcare infrastructure in different parts of the country, particularly red states and rural areas where you're going to get really underserviced populations. There's a lot of class going on there in the United States, but the lack of testing, the wasting of time, the inability to get up the curve early to understand the level of spread in the United States means that the potential of some healthcare systems in the U.S. to get overwhelmed is real. And when Dr. Fauci said over the weekend, as he did, that you could have 100,000 to 200,000 deaths in the United States, which is an extraordinary number, though in the context of a normal flu season is about 2 to 4 times what we had last year, it also implies that the healthcare systems don't get overwhelmed. It implies 20 to 50 million total cases in the United States, and that people that need ICU treatment get ICU treatment, and they have the personnel to provide that ICU treatment. That may not happen, and that may not happen in New York fully. It may not happen in New Orleans, probably won't, may not happen in some other cities too. Compared to most other developed countries, the U.S. healthcare response has been substandard so far. The private sector response has been strong. It's been strong both in terms of ensuring that you have you have an active effort to develop vaccine, to develop drugs that can engage in treatment, to get testing up to speed quickly. Certainly, the American corporates have done a better job than the European corporates have on that front. On the monetary and fiscal side, the U.S. has outperformed. The scale and scope, as well as the immediacy of what was done on a bipartisan basis, well beyond what we've seen in 2008, 2009. Also well beyond, in terms of percentage, what you're seeing in Europe or Japan or South Korea. And it's clearly necessary, because this shutdown of global supply and demand is something that's going to be with us for at least 3 months. That's a pretty big deal. So we put all of those together, and you would say the Americans are holistically responding, I would say, slightly better than average. It's certainly not Italy on the bad side. It's not Germany on the good side, not South Korea on the good side. It's probably closer to, say, France. Even the United Kingdom, I would say the American response has been stronger, because the UK was so later than the Americans, in actually talking about shutdowns, lockdowns, and social distancing. So that's how you put the U.S. in the context of other rich states. Putting the U.S. in the context of poorer states, it's not even close. And that's because these poorer states can't afford to have the kind of economic shutdowns that we can afford in the wealthy world. They can't physically do the social distancing, because the average citizen literally doesn't have the space, doesn't have the personal and physical space to be able to keep other people so distant. And in the case of the governments themselves, they don't have the healthcare system to be able to take care of those that will need treatment. Now, the good news is that in emerging markets around the world, most of them have had comparatively limited explosions of cases so far, in part because they don't have the same level of globalization, people transiting from all over the world, from China, from Europe, from the United States, into those countries. One of the reasons why African cases have been limited is because they're comparatively deglobalized. But it's also because they're not testing that much. And some of these countries are now about to experience explosions of cases, and the exponential rise of cases in those countries is every bit on the same path as it has been in the US and in Europe. I'm talking about Turkey, I'm talking about Brazil, I'm talking about Mexico, many emerging markets around the world, dozens and dozens. And the international support for those countries isn't there. So far, we've gotten $50 billion in support from the IMF for emergency funding 3 weeks ago. They expected 3 to 5 countries would ask for emergency funding by now. It was 81 countries as of this weekend. They're expecting it'll hit past 100 this week. They'll get more money. It won't be enough. The average emerging market is doing about 1% of GDP in fiscal relief. They're going to need 10%. It's not going to come domestically. It's probably not going to come internationally. And if you want to criticize the United States response, again, as so many in the media have been doing, the real criticism is on the lack of international leadership, the fact that outside the United States, the U.S. has done virtually nothing. No coordination with other countries in how we should respond together, coordination of data, coordination of responsive communications, no good information to allies in advance of what the Americans are doing so they know what the Americans are up to. Certainly no good coordination with the Chinese, and the Chinese haven't been cooperative particularly either. But historically, when you have major crises, the United States is out there taking a leadership role. Not always in a productive way. I mean, after 9/11, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were not the best ideas in terms of the amount of money spent, the human consequences, and the fact that the wars ultimately failed. But the Americans did take a leadership role. 2008, 2009, certainly true as well. Today, complete absence of an American leadership role internationally. That's where the Americans are failing. Otherwise, the response from the U.S. has been slightly better than average. But if you only want to focus on Trump's press conferences, you'd say the response, and his communication strategy, you'd say the response has been pretty lousy. So that's where we are. I'll see you guys later in the week, and I hope everyone is doing well. Be safe and avoid people.